What's up, you guys? This is Jay Young2 back with another video. Today we're going to be talking about the truth about James Harden. Enjoy. James Harden is one of the most unique offensive players in NBA history. With his ability to draw fouls effortlessly, half of his points per game come from the free throw line. You add that onto his amazing intelligence and his ability to create his own shot and his underrated athleticism, James Harden has established himself as one of the league's best offensive players and possibly one of the greatest of all time. And even though through the years he's gotten some really bad memes and dirt thrown his name about his defense, but if you really do need him to play some really good defense, he's able to do so. But we all know these things about Harden, so I made a video not too long ago about NBA players who wasted their primes, and I had James Harden on that list. And I briefly discussed about James Harden pretty much wasting his prime right now with the Houston Rockets. And today I wanted to just discuss more in depth about that and the truth behind James Harden. Since having to leave away a golden opportunity in Oklahoma City, James Harden immediately made his impact on the Houston Rockets. I'll never forget, in Harden's first game as a Rocket, he scored 37 points, 12 assists, 6 rebounds, and 4 steals. And basically from that one game, Harden pretty much solidifies himself as one of the league's best up-and-coming players. During that time, the Rockets were a decent team. Harden was the only star player, and he had some solid role players to help the Rockets make the playoffs that season. But that season was pretty much irrelevant. The Rockets, they finished with a 45-37 record. They lost in the first round of the playoffs. But next season was when things really started shifting for the Rockets. After a failed experiment in Los Angeles, Dwight Howard was trying to escape the Lakers, so he signed with the Rockets for a 4-year, $88 million contract. With the development of Chandler Parsons, who was a pretty decent third option for the Rockets at the time, a defensive monster in Patrick Beverley, and some pretty good pieces in Jeremy Lin and Terrence Jones at the time, and of course the duo of Dwight Howard and James Harden, the Rockets were seen as a pretty tough threat out in the West. And this was Daryl Morey's first experiment with the Houston Rockets, with James Harden being the star player. And that season, Harden still averaged around 25 points a game. Dwight Howard was still a pretty solid piece for the Rockets, and he played pretty solid offense. And the Rockets finished with a 54-28 record that year. They were one of the league's best offensive teams, and on defense, they were pretty decent as well. Sadly, though, the Rockets were matched up against the Portland Trail Blazers in the first round of the playoffs, and that team was even better than the Rockets. They had more pieces, and Damian Lillard, of course, hit the shot of shots, and the Rockets lost that series in 6 games. But really, honestly, the Rockets should have won that series. And looking at Harden that season, he was very close to winning the MVP that year. But the Dwight Howard experiment for Harden was interesting. These two did make it to the Western Conference Finals the next year in 2015, but they lost in 5 games to the Warriors. But Dwight and Harden never really got along. In Harden's own words, he said it just didn't work out. The next season, the Rockets only won 41 games. In the year that they made it to the Western Conference Finals, Dwight Howard barely played in the regular season. And once it got time to the playoffs, he really wasn't fully at 100%. It was even rumored that Harden demanded Howard to be traded at the deadline in February during that time. But that year in 2015, the Rockets drafted Clint Capella. He was just another typical big man at the time, but he was developing quickly. And Dwight was becoming more injury prone, and problems with him and management really didn't help out Harden. So Dwight Howard decided to go into free agency, opting out of his 4th year of his contract, making him an unrestricted free agent, and he signed with the Atlanta Hawks. This was a failed experiment in the midst of James Harden's prime. But the Rockets knew in order to help James Harden's game take a new level, they were going to have to make some coaching adjustments. So they decided to fire head coach Kevin McHale, who wasn't a bad coach, but offensively, he could have helped Harden's game take it to an even another level. And They needed a coach that can actually do that, so they hired one of the greatest to ever do it, Mike D'Antoni. And immediately that next season, the Rockets definitely showed how good of a team they were, even with just having Harden as their star player. They won 55 games with a pretty solid team with Patrick Beverley still, Trevor Ariza, Lou Williams, Montrezl Harrell, Eric Gordon. Clint Capella was playing much better this year. The Rockets definitely had a solid team, and they even made it to the second round of the playoffs against the San Antonio Spurs. But the Rockets, they were a really good team, but they knew themselves as well. If they really wanted to compete for an NBA championship, they were going to have to make some adjustments, and that was adding a new star player. So Daryl Morey does what Daryl Morey does, and he was going to test a new experiment by adding another ball-dominant point guard to the Rockets team, and that player, of course, goes by the name of Chris Paul. When the Rockets added Chris Paul on the roster, there was many questions at the time. How was these two players going to fit together? They're both very ball-dominant. They need the ball to dominate in game. One is a very high isolation player, and the other is capable of doing the same thing as well. But what really helped this Rockets team out was that they are both playmakers as well, and they knew how to set up their teammates for good plays. Harden, that last season when the Rockets won 55 games, he was averaging over 11 assists a game along with 29 points. So Harden was definitely more than capable of being a great facilitator, along with Chris Paul, who's already established himself as one of the greatest passers in NBA history. But it wasn't just, of course, Chris Paul and James Harden who really helped the Rockets become successful. It was the players on the roster. Trevor Ariza is definitely a good 3-and-D player, and he definitely helped out the Rockets at the time. Clint Capella had an easy job of catching alley-oops, protecting the rim, and getting rebounds, and he shot very efficiently from the field. Eric Gordon was a solid third option for the Rockets, and he was an amazing shooter, and he still is today for the Rockets. Joe Green, let's not forget, was in his backyard playing basketball until the Rockets called him up to sign with the team, and he definitely contributed a lot. Luke Abaamute, another player that not many people talk about, was a key piece to that Rockets team success because of his amazing defensive ability and his ability to shoot threes. We all know about PJ Tucker and his ability as well to play defense and shoot the corner three at a pretty decent level, but this Rockets team was a very deep team, and going into that year, they were a team seen as a problem that could possibly really compete with the Golden State Warriors when you look at their team on paper. And well, for Harden and the Rockets, well, they definitely lived up to the expectations placed on them that year. They won a franchise record 65 games, and Harden was a dominant force this year, averaging over 31 points a game, and he won MVP, no surprise, and it was finally his time to win MVP. He deserved it. And in the regular season, they won the matchup against the Warriors in the 3 games they played against each other. And really, going into the playoffs, this series, the Warriors versus Rockets, that was the NBA Finals. So let's really be honest with each other here. That series, the Rockets had the momentum. They even went up 3-2 in that series. But we all know what happens next. Man, oh man. And I was going for the Rockets in this series. I legitimately thought the Rockets could have won this series. Sadly, we all know that Chris Paul suffered a hamstring injury, and that forced him to sit out for the next 2 games. And because of that, the Rockets lost the series. And in Game 7, they barely lost that game, only losing by 9 points. But that night, the Rockets, they were terrible shooting from the field. Harden was not shooting well from the field. Trevor Ariza was very bad. It was just a mess, that game. And the next season again, the Rockets had another opportunity, and Harden being even more dominant of a player that next year, the Rockets still, even when the Warriors lost Kevin Durant due to injury, the Rockets lose in 6 games to the Golden State Warriors in the second round. But really, when you look at their roster, they did lose Trevor Ariza. They lost Luka Baumute, 2 of their best defenders on their team, especially out on the perimeter, and that definitely did not help out their team. And that next year, that Rockets team just overall, it it wasn't the same team, and they didn't play to that same level that they could have been. But obviously the experiment with Chris Paul wasn't a complete disaster, though it could have been even better. They definitely had a golden opportunity to make the NBA Finals, where they possibly could have beaten the Cleveland Cavaliers. Weren't that lucky. Fast forward today now, the Rockets made, of course, the big trade of trading for Russell Westbrook. And both Harden and Westbrook are 30 years old, and these two have a few really good seasons ahead of them of solid basketball still. The Rockets even traded away Clint Capella. And now this team has nothing but guards and wings. And this team, they live and they die by the three-pointer. Mike D'Antoni obviously is still the head coach today. And we all know how dominant of a player James Harden is. That's why I really didn't go too much in detail about how obviously good he is. But what I was really trying to show you about the cycle of what Harden has gone through pretty much is basically he's been through experiment after experiment, and now he's with a new experiment with Russell Westbrook. And yes, the Rockets obviously they are still a pretty good team, but they're not going to win an NBA championship with Harden being the team's best player. Even though they're very, very close to winning it all, and they could have won it all in 2017 if they could have beat the Warriors, this Rockets team they're not competing out with the best teams out west. The Rockets have tried multiple experiments with James Harden, but none of them never worked. They've been really good though at building solid teams around Harden to compete for an NBA championship. But each and every year, it's just going to be the same thing that we hear about James Harden, and he's just not going to win. You know, everybody over the years have talked about him in the playoffs not being the best player that he truly could be, like how he is in the regular season. But also you add on to the point where he signed that massive extension with the Rockets, and I honestly think that Harden isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Yes, he's going to finish his career as one of the greatest Rockets players of all time, but he's not going to win an NBA championship anytime soon. Regardless of how many star players they put with him, many opportunities that they try to build with him and try to do, I don't think any of it's really going to pay off at all. So the truth is that James Harden is one of the greatest offensive players that we've ever seen. The Rockets have failed him. They've tried to build amazing opportunities for him, and sadly for him, he was very close to winning it in 2017. But Chris Paul getting injured really did not help him out. And Harden is now 30 years old, and he has a few more pretty solid years left of him of solid elite play. But if he can actually demand a trade or even leave the Rockets just completely, maybe then he can try to compete for an NBA championship. But for now, Harden's career and what the direction is going towards, he's just going to be one of the greatest NBA players in NBA history to never win an NBA championship. And Russell Westbrook too. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Have a great day. Peace.